Alex is back, but his impact is going to affect players on this team. We're going to talk about that and what it means for UConn. You're on Big East Energy Network. Hoops Cat Pod. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Hoops Cat Pod, powered by Big East Energy and our new sponsor, Joey Bail Bonds. We hope you don't need this service, but if you do, make sure you're calling Joey Bail Bonds. I'm going to throw his number on the screen here shortly. You'll see it kind of scroll through as we talk with Bella Tamano of the Hoops Capital of the World, and also a UConn student. And listen, big-time contributor here to Big East Energy Network and the Hoops Cat Pod. Bella, didn't get a chance to talk to you yet about Alex's impact and him coming back. We kind of talked pre-show about this. Let's talk about how his return is going to affect not only minutes, but how other people are going to play having a guy like Alex and his leadership back with the Huskies.
Yeah, I think UConn has had a mentality of, each player like rubbing off on another. You know what I'm saying? Like one guy sets the standard and everybody follows. And Alex is a prime example of that. I think him and Coach Hurley, like they get along. I think it's like a bread and butter type thing. And I think having him on the court is a great extension of like a coach, really. I think he impacts everybody. It's undeniable. And I think for me, the biggest thing is the campus vibe. I think everybody is ecstatic. Everybody, the immediate response was, we're back, we're back. Right. And I just think that having a guy like Alex back, despite not having maybe the greatest year, I think it puts everything into place in a way that you couldn't have written it up better.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because when we talk about this pre-show, and then I had this conversation on Big East Energy Weekly with Casey about because he made a comment like, I don't know, like Alex being back really just doesn't move the needle for me. And a part of me, I try not to get like pissed off at stuff like that, but I also do get frustrated when people that I know basketball, especially Casey, who was a coach, don't kind of realize the impact that he has. Like, also in a world that we're talking about people leaving constantly and retaining, I don't feel like it's celebrated enough that Alex is back for his fourth year. It's not like he's just back and he's 28 years old, like some of these guys that are trying to get those extra years of eligibility, which I don't care about. Like, I just want to be clear about that. If you can get paid to still play basketball in college and you're 27 years old, good on you. But that's not this scenario here. This is Alex. He redshirted his first year. It's his fourth official year at UConn. So he's a senior. He's already graduated. So he's going to be probably taking some graduate credit next year. So I'm curious, like, why do you think that is it because he's not like a sexy pick? Like, because his athleticism doesn't like jump off the page at you? Do you think that's part of the reason why people have that reaction? And even to yourself, like you kind of said, not something similar, but I'll let you speak for it. But I'm curious why you think that reaction is had by some fans and critics alike.
I just think it's last year, in my opinion, and yes, you kind of, like we said, we talked about a pre-show. There, his numbers were solid. I just felt like and it's not even on the court. I think like his clutch factor went away last year, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. That's what I look at it. I felt like when we needed a bucket, like the games that I was at the Marquette game at Gamble, I was at the St. John's game at Gamble, and I just felt like when we needed a shot, it was like, oh, you felt good about Karaban shooting the ball, and it was just like off the iron or like he just wasn't, he didn't have as successful as a season as he's had in those championship runs. The other thing is, though, let's be honest, like he wasn't forced to be the number one guy in those years. And that's the obvious, that's stating the obvious. You had Cam Spencer, you had Stephon Castle, you had Hawkins, you had all these guys, I'm sure I missed a couple that were able to kind of relieve him and take some pressure off. But I just think that people still expected him to transition to the same type of player that he was, and potentially even better. And I do think, it's still, there's leadership qualities that you can't replace, but I don't know. I just think that that's where that kind of sort of hate comes from, is just the fact that he didn't have as a successful year.
Yeah.
In big moments, I would say.
Do you and I don't disagree to a large extent there. The Marquette game, he was clutch. He hit the 3 to kind of put us up by 4, and that eventually was the game winner.
Fair.
St. John's, he didn't play well in that game. He didn't shoot a lot. I think the fair criticism of Alex would be, if you're going to go out on your shield the way he did against Florida, and he just shot and he didn't shoot well. Oh, well, okay. That's life.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I would say that I didn't expect, and I'll get to that in a second. I guess one criticism that I thought was fair was, on nights that he didn't perform, he didn't really look for his shot. He was hesitant to take shots, especially 100%. When defenses were closing in on him. He's had a propensity to shoot not as well against tougher competition. So what that means is his ability to shoot in shorter windows, similar to a quarterback not being able to fit it into a smaller window against a defense, has lacked, and that's where his numbers dropped from 40% to 34.9. I think for me, that's all fair. The stuff that I didn't like, and I thought was mind-boggling, is it's kind of like anything. When somebody doesn't do something, everybody on the internet's an expert, right? And I'm not sitting here saying that I'm a shooting expert, but I have put up some videos. I think everyone knows that I can shoot the ball. Like, I may not be a good athlete in the grand scheme of life, but if there's one thing I can do on a basketball court, is I can put the ball in the hole.
Mm-hmm.
For people to sit there and say Alex needs to fix his shot is probably one of the weirder things for me, because here he is going to, if not the best program in the country, a top 3 program in the country perennially. And if they felt like he had shooting mechanic issues, they probably would fix him.
100%.
And so, does it look a little weird? Sometimes. It kind of comes from the side a little bit. It's a little off. But nobody was saying that when he was a 41% shooter the year before. It's incredible how, when you don't do something, there's someone out there that's like, I can fix that. No, you can't. And even if someone's listening to this and being like, "Oh, Mark, you're pissing on the fans." No, I'm pissing on the guys who proclaim to be like shooting experts, or they feel like he's a little bit off because of that. He wasn't missing because his mechanics are off. He's missing because the entire offense was different. It revolved around him. He didn't have to be he wasn't the 4th or 5th option. He was the 1 or the 2. And to me, that was on Dan. Like, if I had a one-on-one with Dan Hurley, I would literally ask him that question. Do you think it was not fair to Alex to have him make that big a jump to be the 5th option on a national championship team, or 4th on a good day, to now all of a sudden you're 1 or 1A? And I think his response would be, well, we also had bigger plans for Aiden Mahaney. We had bigger plans for some players that never came to fruition. So he was thrusted into that situation. I think he's more prepared now if he needs to be that next year in certain games. And B, I think they've done a good enough job of surrounding him with more talent that he's not going to have to be.
I 100% agree. And the other thing too I want to say is, before, when I was talking about Alex flaws and kind of nitpicking a little bit, it was more so a devil's advocate sort of type beat. But the thing that I want to say about him too is, like, they didn't necessarily have a bad year as it was. It just wasn't a national championship year,
right.
And that's fine. It's not going to happen. They set such a high standard, and it just, they were bound to have a year where they didn't go all the way, and that is 1,000% normal. On the mechanics side too, I just want to play this into anything. A lot of it's just mental too. I mean, if you change somebody's mechanics, it's like changing your golf swing. It can benefit you, but mentally it can destroy you as a whole. So changing something that you've done since you were 10 years old. Like, you can tell, like, your shot when you're 10, or I don't want to say 10, maybe about like 12 or 13, when you finally get enough strength to like get behind the ball and actually have like a little bit more proper mechanics, pretty much stays pretty similar. Like, you can tell, oh, like, you can tell somebody by their shot. You can identify somebody by their shot. So to do that would just be insane. Like, there's no point. And I think a lot of Alex's uh you know poor games last year came from mental lapses, in my opinion. And to change your whole mechanics, I mean, that would
No,
mentally screw anybody up.
without a doubt. And I'm so glad you brought up golf swings, because it makes me laugh when people, like, someone says to me, because I'm a decent golfer and sometimes I hit the ball pretty well, and someone will go, what do you think about when you play golf? And I go, nothing. Like, I center the ball, and I think my dad taught me to keep the club low and go back slow and keep your head down. Like, that's it. Like, all the people that kind of go, well, I need to tuck my elbow and all this other stuff, like, those are the same people who are like, Alex needs to get in the gym and work on those mechanics. And it's like, yeah, dude, how is that helping your golf swing? Or whatever you're doing on the side. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. And we're going to take a quick break, because one topic that's not in the rundown before we get to the way too early rankings after the break is UConn just got themselves a great coach who I think is going to make an impact in Mike Nardi from Villanova. We talked about him coming in about 10, 15 days ago, and now it's official. So we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to talk about that on the Hoop Scout. All right. Let's bring in, I don't have anyone to bring in. Let's actually, I'm going to put up Joey's banner here in a second. But let me ask you a question, Bella. When you saw Mike Nardi being, that was the word on the street, and now it's official. He was the interim coach when they let Kyle Neptune go. He wasn't expected to be retained. I think it's a huge ad for them, because Tom Moore was essentially doing double duty. He was the GM, and he was also being an assistant coach. So people that don't really know what's going on with that, Tom Moore is now ascended to the general manager of the UConn Huskies, which I think is a phenomenal position for Tom. Shout out Coach Moore. Was a legacy of Calhoun's, coached at Quinnipiac, now back with Danny and the boys, and now is essentially in that full-time role. Now it's essentially, you have this triumvirate of Mike Nardi, Kamani Young, and Kamani Young and Luke Murray. So I think for me, what's interesting about that is it kind of put someone in place in case you lose Luke or Kamani to a head coaching job the following year, as another really good young assistant coach. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Dan Hurley's a very calculated guy, and I'm sure that he's probably thinking similar to you, as in, like, we have to set up our future, have to know what's at stake. We're a big time program that people are gonna, not necessarily poach from us, but eventually some guys like Luke and Kamani are gonna be ready to take that next step to a head coaching position. But I just think it's great. I think adding another guy too, like that knows the Big East is another great thing, because I think for us, I mean, our brand, it's called Big East Energy. People outside of the Big East that aren't fans of the Big East, that don't really just don't really follow it. I don't think you can, unless you're involved in it, unless you're surrounded by it, I don't think you can understand it a little bit. It takes a minute to kind of realize what the Big East is about, in my opinion, at least. And I think that you take another guy that knows the sort of ins and outs in the system of it. I think it's going to be a great plus for you. And I think that this guy's also probably pretty familiar with our guys. He's had to coach against them, and he's had to probably say, okay, how can we shut him down? How can we shut Alex Karaban down? And now it goes from how can we shut Alex Karaban down to how do other teams prep against Alex Karaban and now neutralize that in a way. So I love it. I think it's great, and I think it's going to help us. There's really no downside to adding in Nardi.
I'm going to flash something. By the way, Joey Bell Bonds, if you need Joey Bell Bonds, and we hope you don't, Call 860-916-6747 for fast service there. All right. Way too early top 25s have come out. This is John Fanta's. I'm going to put this on the screen. You can react to this. UConn is at 4. What are your thoughts initially?
Okay. I listen, again, it's tough for me to kind of go against UConn, but I'm going to have to say, I just feel like, I don't know. I know, they brought in a lot of guys. I'm happy with, the team that they're piecing together. Alex coming back is obviously great. Part of me feels that, I don't know. I think that's a little bit high for us. I think that, that's the thing. I mean, I guess it is like, obviously it is just way too early, like it is. And I think it's not an awful prediction. I just think that there's a little bit too many what ifs, and don't get me wrong, I love proven talent, but we thought Aiden Mahaney was going to be great, and he didn't pan out. So, you got a guy like Silas Damari Jr. and Malachi Smith coming in. Yeah, they're good, and they were good for their, own respective teams, but coming to a program like Connecticut's different, and playing for Dan Hurley's different, and there's a bigger spotlight on you. So I don't know. I think 4 is just a little high for me. I don't know, Mark. I think, I know you're probably gonna disagree with me.
Well,
So
I wrote something on this, and it's based off of in a response to the St. John's Mega Hall, and even Creighton's got a decent amount of guys coming in the portal. I 1000% disagree that UConn didn't do enough, because just based off of data, like, you can have a feeling. Opinions are in my opinion, opinions are never wrong. But when you start to look at the data of why it's important not to rely on just heavy portal acquisitions, I'm going to read something that I wrote in my Substack, Hoops Capital of the World. If you guys want to make a donation to it, please do so. We got a lot of great stuff. There's going to be a lot more written in articles that are during the year, kind of a tough time to write because there's nothing to write about. We do more shows on it. So this is something I wrote. Teams with returners accounting for at least 50% of minutes consistently outperform those heavily leaning on portal acquisitions. 3 of this year's Final Four teams, including Houston and Florida, the teams that were in the finals, leaned on returners for over 69% of their minutes, a testament to the power of stability. So when you talk about this, and then if you go to someone like Evan Miyakawa at evanmiya.com, he further validates Dan Hurley's approach of kind of this retain plus. It's not retain and then we just kind of don't do anything like Marquette. It's teams in the top 10 average 60% of their minutes from returners. While these are, some of that is a little bit up for debate, the teams that end up going to the Final Four are not. The only outlier was Duke last year. And part of that is because they had the player of the year in Cooper Flagg. Yeah. So if you take him away, they don't make the Final Four. I'm convinced of that. So of this list, the teams that have heavy retention are Purdue, Houston, us. Texas Tech is kind of waiting on Darian Williams. He may go someplace else. He may come back. Arkansas is a heavy portal team. Iowa State's a heavy retain team. Tennessee is more on the retain side, but they also kind of mix in some portals. And they got Nate Ament, who might be the best player in the recruiting class last year. You have some teams like my opinion is, why isn't BYU higher? Like, BYU is 17th. They have the number 1 recruit in the country. They've gotten like 10 people in the portal. I'm exaggerating, but they're all high impact. It's not, or Creighton. Like, I'm not trying to pump up our Big East guys, but like Creighton should be in the top 10 here. Like, there is no doubt about it. They're between their coaching staff, between the portal additions that they've had. Owen Freeman, before all the other names decided to jump in, was the number 1 portal front court guy. They got him. Josh Dix, who's a 6'6", 6'7" point guard, shooting guard. They have him. He's from Omaha. Why isn't he higher? Why aren't they higher? Like, I just feel like we could split hairs on this. But the biggest thing that I would say, let me get us back to where we normally are here, is that when you're talking about these way too early top 25s, it's not always about the talent. Like St. John's is probably the most talented team in the Big East right now, easily, from top to bottom, between production and what people are talking about, different players. But beware of this, because we had this same issue with Aiden. When you bring in guys from conferences that aren't as tough as the Big East, even if they're not undersized like he was. Dylan, I think his name is Dylan Gabriel. Like, what's the kids from that they just got from St. John's, who's the point guard? Dylan, I think it's not Dylan Mitchell. Either way, their point guard, I'm gonna look up his name, is coming from Idaho. And no disrespect to the Big West, but that's a big leap to come and play point guard at St. John's.
Yeah.
And then you start talking about some of the other players they got. They got Isaiah Sellers from Stanford. The ACC is pretty soft, no disrespect. So to me, like I love the fact that they brought back 5 of their players from last year, and I think that impact and having Alex back is the reason why they're a top 5 team. And should be one of the favorites to make the Final Four and win a national championship next year.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing I want to say too is, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion. I don't know if it's a popular opinion. I hate these kinds of lists. I know you have to do them. I know people have to do them. Especially like we talked about it. There's a lull in like media and news. Not every day. Things are happening. So these kind of get people through. I just think that these. Like there's some teams on that list that are probably a little bit higher, like I said with UConn, and I think sometimes they give people a little bit of a false sense of hope, and I think we've seen it. You see it every year. Teams that are projected top 10 lose, like they lose their first game by like 30 points to a not so great team, and that team. I know it's how it is. It's some teams aren't going to pan out. Some teams are going to pan out. That's obviously how it always goes in every single sport. I don't know. These lists just. Like I said, they have to happen, but they're just not my favorite. That's the only thing.
Yeah, the other thing I would say too is, and I totally agree with you, is that it's like fuel for debate, and it's sometimes it can be silly. By the way, it's Dylan Darling. I didn't want to name the kid something different or kind of make his name that just kind of escaped my brain for a minute.
Fair.
But anyway, yeah, I do think that he potentially could struggle. And I think, but I still would have St. John's in my top 5. Like if I made one of these lists, like you, I don't, because I don't feel like it's necessary at this point. But John Fanta, who I love, and I know you've met and think he's a great guy. I have no issue. I have no issue with people putting these top 25 stuffs out there. But what I would like for them to do is start to kind of look at some of the data before they do so.
Yeah, that's fair.
To kind of just so you can kind of give a more accurate depiction of like what it'll likely be.
Right.
And I mean, hell, even when we look back at that, who's had a great portal? If we're just going by numbers, like Illinois, they brought in 1 million guys, and like they're like pretty much all like international players.
Yeah.
So we don't really know exactly what to expect, right?
Kind of like the UConn women this year.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to take a very quick break, and then we have a short segment about an NBA what if that Bella wants to bring to our attention, and it's about Dan Hurley. So we're going to talk about that on the Hoops Gap. And you're back on the Hoops Gap, powered by Big East Energy and sponsored by Joey Bail Bonds. Make sure you check him out if you ever are in a tough spot. You can reach him at this number, and Bella's going to talk through NBA what if. I think you said your dad bring this up to you, or just walk me through it.
So me and my dad do a lot of these like what if things. We've done a lot of like just kind of like ultimatum stuff. Like, is this possible? Again, like some devil's advocate stuff. So I think the question that he brought up is, and this is a little bit not necessarily outdated, but this was last night. It was Detroit versus the Knicks.
Yeah.
And my dad was just saying if the Knicks lost, or if the Knicks do, somehow like get swept by the Celtics, is there a chance that Tom Thibodeau gets the boot, and maybe they look at a guy like Dan Hurley? I think, with LA last year, I think that there was a very that's a long way to go. That's all the way across country.
Yep.
New York is as good of a market as LA.
Mm-hmm. If not
And
better.
If not better. And it is cross state lines. It's a bordering state. Is that a right fit? Would it be a right fit now? Could that be a future? Like, what do you think, Mark? I want to know your thoughts, and then I'll kind of give mine.
Well, I'll preface this by saying that it's not a bad question at all. It's a really cool, for instance, because when some of this chatter happened before the season started, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got a message, and I'm not going to say who it was from. It was from a recruit, not the recruit, but from a family member that said, do you think Dan would take the Knicks job? And I was just like, I don't think so. Not right now. But after one more year at UConn and what he potentially thinks is a really good team, I think he thinks they're going to be very good. I think he thinks that he's got a stud coming in Braylon Mullins that is going to really, dominate from the start. I think he thinks with Alex back, he has a guy that can kind of like show the young cats like what they need to do to be a UConn Husky. So if for some reason they end up winning another national championship or fall just short or get to the Final Four, and then that job is open, I think that would appeal to him. Is it a fit? I don't know. Is he too much like Tom Thibodeau? I think he's a little more flexible. I think they're of similar mindsets of being like old school coaches. But I can tell you that I know that Dan is a competitor, and thinking about the idea of being the first coach to win an NBA title for the Knicks, especially with a guy like Giannis potentially being rumored to go to the Knicks in the offseason, either by trade or by, I think he potentially resign or sign with them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much better of a coach is Dan Hurley if your team has Jalen Brunson, Giannis, and I don't know if Karl Anthony Towns will still be on the team, but if that was the case, like all of that, like I think it's 1,000% a possibility. You're not going to get Andrew Hurley is not going to say no to that.
No, exactly. I think that was
you know what I mean. Like, and I'm not saying that to be like like I know that she has a big, is a big
She's
part
involved.
of the decision making process,
yeah.
as any husband and wife duo would have about a move, right, that affects your life. And because to be honest, you don't even have to move.
No,
like there's plenty of people who live in Glastonbury that commute to New York City and take a train or just drive in and have an apartment, for during the week and whatever. Like they could do it in a myriad of ways. So I think it's an interesting comment. I know there's plenty of people that would like that. Like I know there's UConn fans who are Knicks fans that wouldn't have an issue with it.
Yeah.
But I know that there's UConn fans who are Celtics fans who'd be pissed. Yourself included. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that's a realistic possibility?
I do. I do. And the other thing is too, this is just like a feeling that I just kind of thought of. Like if you bring in a guy like Nardi, right? Like we said, is he that guy that's gonna now the big three is gonna be Kamani, Nardi, and Luke? And do you think like Kamani or Luke get the UConn job when Dan leaves? Is that like something that they've talked about for the near future? Like, is that kind of the way things are going to crumble? I think that, like I said, Dan's a calculated guy. I could see him wanting to set this program up for success. I
don't mean to cut you off. I think there's a what if factor that they all kind of think about. Anytime a coach is moving from place to place, or you're at a spot like UConn, which is like kind of like a final destination if you're a head coach.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have aspirations to go coach in the NBA, it's not, right. And I know we know that Dan does. I think that Dan is never going to coach another college team other than UConn. I think he's made that very clear. But the Knicks or even Brooklyn would be different. Like I know Brooklyn's a dumpster fire right now, but like I'm saying, like just regionally, the Sixers, like if there was a team that was around this area that or the Celtics, I know they're rolling, so that's not going to happen. But any of these teams, if anytime an open position comes up, Dan Hurley's going to be mentioned because he's a guy who has NBA aspirations and flirted with going all the way across the country. Like you said, why wouldn't he have, the impetus to kind of just roll down I-95? So
Yeah.
I think that's our ticket train. Like, I think that that's definitely fair, but logistically, like, or more just on the basketball side, I don't know if he's ready for it. Like, I'm just being honest. Like, Dan is not ready to go on a Tuesday night in Utah and take a night off mentally. Like, that's just not who he is. And I know everyone's dunking on JJ Redick and the Lakers because they dunked on us after they had a great season. We dodged a bullet with no Dan Hurley, and then they get trounced by the Wolves.
Yeah.
But what I would give you is, if there's one thing that JJ Redick has over Dan Hurley, is mentality. They may be just as competitive. They may have the same mindset when it comes to coaching, which I don't think they do. But if they did, the one thing that JJ has over Dan is, I don't think JJ is going to be kicking himself or mentally distraught about losing 32 games. Like, if you lose 32 games in the pros, you had a pretty good year, 50 and 32. That's the tough thing with Dan. Like, I don't necessarily know if he is built for that right now.
That's
what I mean? Like,
exactly, because the thing is, you go from like a 35 to 40 game season to if you go all the way,
it's a grind,
and you push to some, game 6s, game 5, game 7s. You play almost 90 games ish, rough, just about almost 90.
And you know this, and hold on, you know this about Dan too. Like, this is so important to mention this. Whenever you're as open about yourself as you are with the media that Dan is, he's not ready. He's not ready for an everyday, like, where he's addressing NBA media.
Yeah.
And the way he addresses people like you and I, and, the beat reporters, and like, he is so honest and forthright with his thoughts. Like, I don't necessarily know if he's ready to kind of like play the tongue in, the cheeky game of being like, like, I'm going to not talk about that or whatever. Like, that takes energy too. Like,
100%.
The amount of energy that gets taken out of you when you give something of yourself daily is just like exhausting. So if Dan is going to do this on a daily basis in the NBA, like, how long can you last? Like, the burnout level of that would be astronomical. So unless he's ready to make a change, I don't see it.
I agree with you. And the other thing too, I want to say is, based off of what you're saying, like, all that stress is, you have guys in college that are working towards something. Okay. You have guys in college that are trying to make it to the NBA, and they need to prove themselves. When you get to the NBA, things are a lot different. Hurley focuses on defense. He doesn't focus on, like, half-assing anything. Let's be real. Like, that's just not his style. And when you watch an NBA game, there's guys that are like, like you said, there's guys that kind of, I think, mentally take games off. And that's not going to fly with him. And to me, when I think of Dan Hurley, I think of, like, I've made this comparison a lot of times, like, not necessarily to these two guys, but when I think of this sort of coaching style, it's like a Bill Belichick type of thing. When it can you sustain that type of, can you ask your guys that much, and when is it going to get to a point where they just kind of don't buy in anymore? And I think that's something that could happen for Dan, is if he gets to an NBA position, is if the guys don't buy in like they did in college. I think that's going to take a lot out of him. And I don't know, is it going to directly translate? I do think he'll be a good NBA coach. I just think that it would really need to be the perfect situation.
Yeah, I agree. Well, hopefully we don't have to talk about that, but we may, depending on what happens in this Knicks Celtics series. So, all right, Bella, we're going to call it a day. Enjoy your Friday. And I just appreciate you jumping on and giving people your thoughts. And yeah, we're going to grind it out. Big East Energy Network has added another show with the Pirate Vibes is on officially. If you want your weekly Seton Hall fix, you definitely can get that here at Big East Energy, and all of our shows are on the Big East Energy Network here on YouTube. All right, that's it for this program. Bella, thanks so much. Go Huskies.